what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply the second row by 1/2, and I'm going to multiply the third row by -1/4. So my second row now becomes 0, 1, 0, 3, and my third row becomes 0, 2, 1, 11. You don't have to do this, but again, if it's going to make things easier, do it. Now that I got the 1 up here, I'm going to use that row, row 2, to make this 2 become a 0. So I'm going to multiply a -2 to row 2, and I'm going to add it to row 3. By doing that, I'm going to get 0, 0, 1, 5. That's perfect. We already have the 1 here when we do our addition method. Does that happen all the time? No. But if it does, great for you, less work for you to do. So now that I have my row echelon form, and with my 1 diagonal and zeros below, I now can write it back as a system. So the 1, 3, 2 is 1x plus 3y plus 2z equals 25. Then I have no x, so you don't have to write it, plus y, no z, plus 3. So perfect, y equals 3. Awesome. And then I have z equals 5. Luckily, doing it this way, I only had to plug in to find x, and you get an x of 6. So your final answer should be the 6, 3, 5. Now, if you decided not to do what I did with the multiplying by -1/4 row 3, or you decided to swap row 1 with row 2 instead, you're going to get to the same answer as long as you used your operations properly. Okay, you may not perfectly get that 1 diagonal right away like I did, but as long as you get to it, you should be fine. As long as you get the 6, 3, 5, you'll be great. So checkpoint 2, we all started to do in class. So I just kind of want to go over it so that we have that problem. So first I make sure, is it written where all my x's are aligned, my y's, my z's, and then the equals and the constant? It is. It's already in that form, so I can write it as a augmented matrix. On the line, 18, 9, and 6. So, first things first, now that I have as a matrix, I want to get a 1 in that top left corner. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch row 1 and row 2. Again, you could have switched row 1 and row 3 because it also had a 1 there, but it really doesn't matter. So, I'm going to write out what I'm doing, and then I'm going to do it. So it's going to be 1, -1, 2, line 9. And then it's going to be 2, 1, -2, oh, +2, I'm okay. 18. And then 1, 2, -1, 6. That third row is going to stay the same. So I got the 1 up top. Now I want to make the zeros below it using that row. So I have to use row 1 to change row 2. And I have to use row 1 to change row 3. Now with row 2, okay, it has a 2 there. So I'm going to multiply a -2 to row 1 and then add row 2. You could have also multiplied a +2 to row 1 and then subtracted the 2. It would still work out. Now I'm see row 1 and row 3. They already are 1 and 1. So what you could do is just write row 1 minus row 3. Or you could have multiplied the first row by -1 and then added it. You're going to get the same answer at the end of the day. So when I do that, I'm going to have 1, -1 to line 9 because I'm not actually changing row 1. I'm just utilizing it. So now I'm going to do the second row. So -2 times 1 is -2 plus 2 is 0. -2 times -1 is +2 plus 1 is 3. -2 times 2 is -4 plus 2 is -2. And then -2 times 9 is -18 plus 18. I get 0. So row 2 is done. Now for row 3, I just want to take the first row and subtract the third row. So 1 minus 1 is 0. Negative 1 minus 2 is negative 3. 2 minus negative. So when I do 2 minus negative 1, I'm going to add. So it's 3. And then 9 minus 6 is 3. So here we go. And again, feel free to pause whenever you need to. If you feel like I'm going too fast, just pause. That's totally fine, okay? And you could always come back to the video. So now what I want to do is I want to, now that I have the 1 with the zeros perfectly aligned, okay, what I'm going to want to do is now, in order to keep that column perfect, I'm going to want to ignore row 1. So I'm going to try and make now a 1 here. Now I could sit there and multiply 1/3 to row 2. However, if I do that, I'm going to get 0, 1, negative 2/3, line 0. You're going to get a fraction, so that's really annoying. So if that happens, if you want, look at the other row. Look at row 3. If I multiply negative 1/3 to row 3, I would get 0, 1, negative 1, line, negative 1. If you find that row 3 is easier to get a 1 in the middle spot than it is row 2, you can swap them. Okay, so what I would suggest is not to change row 2. Okay, I would not multiply something like that. I would actually take row 3, multiply it by negative 1/3, and swap it with row 2. You can actually do both steps at the same time if you want to save yourself the constant rewriting the matrix over and over and over again. So what I'm going to do, so I'm going to rewrite this over here. So I have 1, 0, 0. Really 1, negative 1, 2, line 9. Now, I want to switch row 2 and row 3. So now row 3 is going to become 0, 3, negative 2, and 0. But the third row now is going to swap up to the second row. And I'm going to multiply negative 1/3. So negative 3 times negative 1/3 is 1. Negative 1/3 times 3 is negative 1. And then again, negative 1. This helps you avoid fractions. If you want to avoid fractions, look for that step. Okay? So, I have my 1 with my zeros, and I have the 1. So now I'm going to use row 2 because I use the row I just got the 1 in. And I combine it with row 3 to make the zeros below it. Now in order to make the 1 match the 3, I got to multiply row 2 by negative 3. And then I will have 1, negative 1, 2, line 9. 0, 1, negative 1, negative 1. And now I'm going to use row 2. I'm not changing it, but I'm going to use it to change row 3. So 0 times negative 3 is 0, plus 0 is 0. Negative 3 times 1 is negative 3, plus 3 is 0. Negative 3 times negative 1 is positive 3, plus negative 2 is 1. Oh, that worked out. And then negative 3 times negative 1 is positive 3, plus 0 is 3. Take your time with this, because if you mess up on one little thing, it could change the entire problem, which I know it sucks, but we had that same issue with solving 3x3 systems in 7.2. So still kind of that risk of messing up one, you mess up everything, but take your time. I'll give you plenty of time. You know I'll give you extra time if you need it, okay? So deep breaths. You can do this. So I lucked out and got, when I made the zeros below in the second column, I got that 1 there. If you didn't get that 1 there, and because you went about it a different way, just remember multiply a constant and you'll be fine. So now that it's in row echelon form, I'm going to rewrite this as a system. So it is 1x minus 1y plus 2z is, no more line, equals 9. Now I have y minus z equals negative 1. And then I have z equals 3. So this is my system now that I got into row echelon form. So I now can back substitute. So y minus z, which is 3, equals negative 1. I add 3 to both sides, and I get a y of 2. Now for up top, x minus my y, which is 2, plus 2 times z, which is 3. And I will get 9. So x minus 2, 2 times 3 is 6, so plus 6 equals 9. Negative 2 plus 6 is 4, so I get x plus 4 equals 9, and I minus 4 from both sides, and I get an x of 5. So your final answer is 5, 2, 3. So I know this takes up space, but as time goes on and you know what you're coming up against, you're going to start to feel better. Okay? All right. Pause the video if you need, but right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go on to example 3. Now, if you'd like to try this on your own, because you did just have one of these on your homework, which I bet you tried really hard on, okay? I'll look over those over the weekend, but let's try this out, okay? If you want to try it on your own, pause the video and you're good. If not, don't worry, I'm here and we're going to do this. So, 4 by 4, really scary, but we're still going to follow the same process. Get a 1 up top, zeros below. Then a 1 here, zeros below. 1 here, zeros below, and then a 1 here, and rewrite. So, luckily it's already the W's, the X's, the Y's, the Z's, they're all aligned, and the equals and the constants. So, I'm just going to write this as a matrix. So it's 2, 1, 1, negative 1. 1, negative 1, negative 1, 2, 3, 2, negative 1, negative 2, and negative 1, negative 2, 1, negative 1. The augmented line. And then I have 6, negative 1, negative 4, negative 7. So, first things first, we want to get a 1 in the top corner. So, you can either switch rows 1 and 2 or rows 1 and 3. Technically, you could switch rows 1 and 4, but what you'd have to do to row 4 is multiply it by negative 1. But why do all that extra work? So, I'm just going to start with row 1, swap with row 2. And when I do that, I will have 1, 2, 1, negative 1, negative 1, 1, negative 1, 2, 2, 3, negative 1, negative 2, negative 2, negative 1, 1, negative 1, line, negative 1, 6, negative 4, negative 7. Again, the more numbers we have in a matrix, the more likely we're going to make silly little mistakes. So just take your time. So I swapped my rows and everything. I'm just checking with my notes. All looks good. Okay. So now that I got my 1 up top, I'm going to make zeros below using that row. So I am going to use row 1 and row 2. Now what we're going to do is I need to multiply a negative 2 to row 1 and then add it to row 2 to make that 2 a 0. Luckily row 1 and 3 already match, so I'm just going to do row 1 minus row 3 to make 1 minus 1, 0. Now row 4 is a negative 1. Now since row 1 is the positive 1, all we're going to do is row 1 plus row 4. They already have those opposite signs, so we're just going to add. You can write all the things you're doing in one solid area like this so that you don't have to keep writing it over and over and over again. Okay? Save yourself the paper and your sanity. So, remember, I'm going to keep row 1 completely the same. I'm just going to utilize it to change everything else. So negative 2 times 1 is negative 2 plus 2 is 0. Negative 2 times negative 1 is 2 plus 1 is 3. Negative 2 times 2 is negative 4 plus 3 is negative 1. Negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4 plus negative 1 is 3. And then negative 2 times negative 1 is 2 plus 6 is 8. Now, if I do row 1 minus row 3, 1 minus 1 is 0. Negative 1 minus negative 1, that actually is adding. I'm going to have 0 as well. Now 2 minus negative 1 is really plus 1, I get 3. And then negative 2 minus 1 is negative 3. And last, negative 1 minus negative, so plus 4, is 3. Now I bet you're probably like, oh, I got the 2 zeros and they all have a GCF of 3. That's going to be a perfect row right there because I want the 0, 0, 1 in the third row. Absolutely. Let's just wait, okay? Now row 1 plus row 4. So 1 plus negative 1 is 0. Negative 1 plus 2 is 1. 2 plus negative 2 is 0. And then negative 1 plus negative 1 is negative 2. And, wait, let me double check that I'm using the wrong row. I'm okay. Hold on one second. Okay, so row 1. 1 plus negative 1 is 0. Negative 1 plus 2 is 1. 2 plus negative 2 is 0. Negative 2 plus negative 1 is negative 3. And negative 1 plus negative 7 is negative 8. So, now, after doing all that addition and all that craziness, I have a 1 and all the zeros. So now all that's left to do is get a 1. Oh, come on, computer. I want to get a 1 here, but I got a 3. I can either multiply by 1/3, however, that negative 1 and 8 will become fractions, and we don't want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to swap row 2 with row 4 because I see row 4 already has that 1 in the spot. So I'm going to swap those. So let me write this over here. Just taking up a lot of space. So I have let's see, 1, negative 1, 2, negative 2, line, negative 1. Now I'm swapping row 2 with row 4. So now my row 2 is 0, 1, 0, negative 3, negative 8. Row 3 stays the same. And then row 4 now becomes 0, 3, negative 1, 3, 8. So, getting there. Okay? Now, something you may have noticed. So I got the 1 and all the zeros, and I got a 1, but I also already have one of the zeros. Think about it kind of like when there's already a letter missing. It's like the problem where I did some of the work for you, right? This will happen on its own if it's meant to happen. If it doesn't, like, don't try and force it to happen, okay? So, luckily it already did one of them for us, so all we're going to do now is I'm going to use row 2, because that's the one we got the 1 in, right? And we're going to combine it with row 4 to make a 0. Now, right now we have a 3 there, so I'm going to multiply a negative 3 to row 2 and add it to row 4. So, okay, 1, negative 1, 2, negative 2, line, negative 1, 0, 1, 0, negative 3, negative 8, 0, 0, 3, negative 3, 3. And now we finally get to do some math. So 0 times negative 3 is 0, plus 0 is 0. Negative 3 times 1 is negative 3, plus 3 is 0. Negative 3 times 0 is 0, plus negative 1 is negative 1. And then negative 3 times negative 3 is positive 9, plus 3 is 12. And then negative 3 times negative 8 is positive 24, plus 8, we get 32. So, we have, again, our 1s with all our zeros below here in column 1 and in column 2. Now we just have to get it in column 3. Now you have two options here. You can times -1 to row 4 and swap it with row 3 because you know this is already the 1, but we need it to switch signs. But as we noticed before, everything in row 3 is already divisible by 3. So why don't you just multiply by 1/3 to row 3 so that you don't have to swap stuff. Okay? So I am going to have 1, -1, 2, -2, line, -1, 0, 1, 0, -3, -8. Now here, 0, 0, 1/3 of 3 is 1, 1/3 of -3 is -1, 1/3 of 3 is 1. And then 0, 0, -1, 12, 32. So, we got the 1 where we wanted it. So we have the 1s with the 0s in the first row, the second column. And we have the 1 here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do row 3 plus row 4. And I am going to, let me write it next to row 4 because I want to replace row 4. They already match with the opposite signs. So when I do that, I get 1, -1, 2, -2, line, -1. 0, 1, 0, -3, -8. 0, 0, 1, -1, 1. And now 0 plus 0 is 0. Again, 0. 1 plus -1 is 0. -1 plus 12 is 11. And 1 plus 32 is 33. Okay, almost there. We have everything we want almost, but we got to change this 11. Luckily, when I divide by 11 or multiply row 4 by 1 over 11, everything actually is divisible by 11. So I will get a whole number. You don't have to worry about fractions for answers. And when you do that, you will get 1 with the zeros below, -1, 1 with zeros below, 2, 0, 1 with a 0 below, and then -2, -3, -1. Now that 11 becomes a 1. Line, -1, -8, 1, and that 33 becomes a 3. So we have our row echelon form. The main diagonal of 1 and all the zeros below. So I'm going to now rewrite that as a system. So 1x minus 1y plus, oh, nope, we're starting with w. 1w minus 1x plus 2y minus 2z equals -1. Now no w, so it's 1x, no y, so you don't have to write it, minus 3z equals -8. If you want to write the x closer, you can. Now I have y minus z equals 1 and z equals 3. So I basically have my system, so all I have to do is back substitute. So y minus z, which is 3, equals 1. I add 3 to both sides, and I get a y of 4. With the x minus 3 times z, which is 3, equals -8. -3 times 3 is -9. I add 9 to both sides, and I get an x of 1. Now my w minus x, which is 1, plus 2 times y, which is 4, minus 2 times z, which is 3, equals -1. Okay, w minus 1 plus 8 minus 6 equals -1. I'm going to combine all this, and I get, bring it over here, w plus 1 equals -1, and minus 1, w equals -2. So my final answer is -2, my w, and my x, which is 1, my y, which is 4, and my z, which is 3. I know, it's a lot, but it's doable. You just got to take the time. It's going to get faster over time. I know you just kind of want to get it done and get to the answer, but it's not always going to just work out that quickly. All right? I promise I will give you stuff that's much faster to do throughout the chapter. Just, you got to stick with me right now. Okay. Pause the video. Try out checkpoint 3. Okay. Hopefully you paused the video. Okay, if not, you're just trying to get through it. All right, let's see how it goes. So, let's try this problem. So I have W, which is 1, 2, 3, 5. Then I have for the x's -3, -7, -7, 1, -2, -1, -3, and 4 for the y's. Then 1, 2, 3, -2 for the z's. Line, -3, 1, -5, 18. Now, this problem worked out where you already have a 1 in the top. If that's done for you, perfect. Less work for you to do. So you could go right into your next step, which is to get the zeros below it. So again, we're going to use row 1. We're going to use row 3. And we're going to use row 5. Now, here, I'll write it this way. Now remember, the negative can go wherever. You can multiply the 1 by -2 and then add it to row 2. Or you can multiply row 1 by 2 and minus. I'm just going to write it that way because that's the way I did it in my notes, but you have other options, okay? I'm going to multiply by 3 and minus, and then row 1 times 5 minus row 4 in order to get the 2, the 3, and the 5 to be zeros. So, we're going to use the first row, but we're still going to keep it the same within the matrix. So, I wrote it out. Now, 1 times 2 is 2, minus 2 is 0. 1 times -3 is -3, minus -7, so plus 7 is 4. Wait. I'm supposed to be multiplying by 2. I'm okay. So, 2 times -3 is -6, minus -7, so plus 7, I get 1. 2 times -2 is -4, minus -1, so plus 1, I get -3. And then 2 times 1 is 2, minus 2 is 0. And 2 times -3 is -6, minus 1, -7. Now, 3 times 1 is 3, minus 3 is 0. 3 times -3 is -9, minus -7, so plus 7, I get -2. -2 times 3 is -6, minus -3, so plus 3, I get -3. 3 times 1 is 3, minus 2 is 1. Minus 3. Oh, I'm really losing my train of thought here. So guys, I'm even doing it. So it's okay if you're doing this. Just take your time, okay? It's also like 9 o'clock at night for me, and I'm trying to get this done so that you guys have something to do and you have your sub. So just bear with me. Now, so row 1, 1 times 3 is 3, minus 3 is 0. Then 3 times -3 is -9. Minus -5, so plus 5 is -4. Get rid of the little scratch. Now, last row. Okay. 1 times 5 is 5, minus 5 is 0. 5 times -3 is -15, minus 1 is -16. I know, you're like, oh no, we're getting double digits. Just, it'll all work out. 5 times -2 is -10, minus 4 is -14. 5 times 1 is 5. Minus -2, so I'm adding, is 7. And then 5 times -3 is -15. Minus 18 is -33. Okay. So I got my 1 with all of my zeros. Now, luckily when I did this, when I go on to the next column, I want to get a 1 here. I already have a 1. So I actually don't have to move anything around in order to get a 1 there. Okay, if it works out, good for you. Less stuff to do. So I'm instantly going to go into getting the zeros below. So I'm going to use row 2 because that's where I just wanted to get the 1 with row 3, and then row 2 combined with row 4. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply row 2 by 2 and add it to row 3, because then 2 plus negative 2 is 0. And I'm going to multiply 1 by 16, row 2 by 16, and then add it to negative 16 to get the 0. So, all right. So the first row, remember, is staying completely the same, because now that we have our column 1 perfect, we're not going to touch row 1. Okay, same way that we did with 3 by 3s. Now, we like row 2 the way it is. We're just going to utilize it to change rows 3 and 4. So 2 times 0 is 0, plus 0 is 0. 2 times 1 is 2, plus negative 2 is 0. 2 times negative 3 is negative 6, plus negative 3 is negative 9. 2 times 0 is 0, plus 0 is 0. And 2 times negative 7 is negative 14, minus 4 is negative 18. Now, the next one, I know I'm going to get a 0 here. 1 times 16 is 16, plus negative 16 is